The fluorescent lights in the Technova laboratory hummed their familiar tune as I adjusted the microscope for the 100th time that week. March in Silicon Valley brought its usual blend of morning fog and afternoon sunshine, but I barely noticed the weather anymore. For the past 18 months, I'd been living and breathing this project, a revolutionary biodegradable coating that could transform the electronics industry. My name is Alexa Chen, and at 28, I was the youngest senior researcher at Technova Industries. The company's glass towers reflected the California sun, standing as monuments to innovation in the heart of San Jose. Inside these walls, brilliant minds worked tirelessly to push the boundaries of technology, and I genuinely believed I was part of something meaningful. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning. I was testing the latest iteration of my eco-friendly coating when the results appeared on my screen. The coating wasn't just biodegradable. It was performing 40% better than traditional materials, while breaking down completely in soil within 6 months. My hands trembled as I ran the test again, then a third time. Each result confirmed what I hardly dared to believe. This could revolutionize how electronics interact with our environment. This is it, I whispered to myself, staring at the data that represented 2 years of failed experiments, late nights, and unwavering determination. The coating could be applied to smartphones, tablets, laptops, virtually any electronic device, making them environmentally sustainable without sacrificing performance. I immediately called my supervisor, Dr. Harrison Mitchell, a man in his 50s with graying temples and a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. "Harrison, you need to see this," I said, my voice barely containing my excitement. "The coding project. I've cracked it." Within an hour, Harrison was in my lab, his sharp blue eyes scanning my results with the intensity of a hawk. Behind him stood Jennifer Walsh, Technova's chief technology officer, her red hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense demeanor. As they reviewed my data, I watched their expression shift from skepticism to amazement. "Alexa," Jennifer said slowly, "do you understand what you've accomplished here?" "I think so," I replied, though her tone suggested I was missing something important. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. This technology could be worth billions, not just to us, but to the entire industry. Every major electronics manufacturer would want to license this. That afternoon, I found myself in the gleaming conference room on the 42nd floor, surrounded by executives in expensive suits. The city sprawled below us, a testament to human achievement and ambition. CEO Marcus Thompson, a man whose presence commanded attention even in silence, sat at the head of the polished oak table. "Alexa," Marcus began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "your work represents exactly the kind of innovation that makes Technova an industry leader. We're prepared to fast-track this to production immediately." I felt a surge of pride, but something in his tone made me pause. "What about the environmental impact studies? The long-term testing protocols?" Jennifer exchanged a glance with Harrison before speaking. "We'll handle all of that internally. What we need from you is continued development, and of course, your complete discretion." "Discretion?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This technology gives us a significant competitive advantage. We can't risk any information leaking to competitors, patents being filed elsewhere, or any complications." The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about protecting intellectual property. They were asking me to remain silent about a breakthrough that could benefit the entire planet. As the meeting concluded, I walked back to my lab in a daze. The evening sun cast long shadows through the corridor windows, and I realized that my moment of triumph had become something far more complicated. The coating that could help save the environment was about to become a corporate secret, locked away from the world that desperately needed it. That night, I sat in my small apartment in Mountain View, staring at the city lights and thinking about the path that had led me here. The daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything for my education, I'd always believed that science was about serving humanity, not serving corporate interests. My parents had instilled in me the values of hard work, integrity, and using my gifts to make the world better. But now I faced a choice that would test everything I believed in. As I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring challenges I wasn't prepared for. The coating that represented the culmination of my life's work was about to become the center of a battle for my very soul. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my lab. Rebecca Martinez, Technova's head of legal affairs, appeared at my door with a stack of documents and a smile that seemed forced. Rebecca was known throughout the company for her sharp legal mind and her ability to make problems disappear, usually in Technova's favor. "Alexa, good morning," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I have some paperwork for you to review and sign." I glanced at the documents she placed before me. The legal jargon was dense, but certain phrases jumped out. Proprietary technology, non-disclosure agreements, exclusive assignment of rights, and confidentiality in perpetuity. "This is more than a standard NDA," I said, flipping through the pages. "This essentially transfers all rights to my research to Technova and prevents me from ever discussing it publicly." Rebecca's smile remained fixed. "It's standard procedure for breakthrough technologies. The company needs to protect its investments. But this research has global implications. The environmental benefits alone could what?" Rebecca interrupted, her tone sharpening. "Could destabilize entire industries. Could cost thousands of jobs as companies scramble to adapt. Alexa, you're brilliant, but you're thinking like a scientist, not a businesswoman." I spent the rest of the morning reading through the documents with growing unease. The agreements were more restrictive than anything I'd ever seen. They didn't just prevent me from discussing my research. They essentially made Technova the sole owner of any future work I might do in related fields. Around noon, Harrison appeared with an unusual offer. "Alexa, why don't you take the rest of the day off? Clear your head. We can discuss this more tomorrow." I drove through the winding hills of Los Altos, seeking solitude and perspective. The California landscape, with its golden grass and scattered oaks, had always been a source of peace for me. But today, even the beauty of the foothills couldn't calm my racing thoughts. That evening, I called my mentor from graduate school, Dr. Elena Vasquez, now a professor at Stanford. Elena had been like a second mother to me, guiding my research and helping me navigate the challenging world of corporate science. "Alexa," Elena said after I explained the situation, "what does your heart tell you?" "That this technology could help address climate change in a meaningful way," I replied. "But I also understand the business realities. Do you?" Elena asked gently. "Because from where I sit, it sounds like you're being asked to choose between your principles and your career." Her words hung in the air long after we ended the call. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning as I weighed my options. The financial security that Technova offered was significant. My current salary was more than my parents had ever dreamed of earning. But was it worth compromising everything I believed in? The next morning brought a surprise meeting with Marcus Thompson himself. His corner office was a testament to success, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley, awards and accolades covering the walls, and a view that reminded visitors of the heights they could achieve. "Alexa," Marcus said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk, "I wanted to speak with you personally about your future here at Technova." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What you've accomplished is remarkable. Your coding technology represents the kind of innovation that defines careers. But more than that, it represents the kind of breakthrough that can define companies." "I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson, but I have concerns about the restrictions you're asking me to accept." Marcus nodded as if he'd expected this. "I understand your concerns. You're a scientist, and you want to see your work benefit the world. But consider this. If we release this technology too early, before we've fully developed it, before we've established proper manufacturing processes, we could actually harm the environment more than help it." He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the valley below. "Imagine if this technology was reverse-engineered by companies with fewer environmental standards. Imagine if it was implemented incorrectly, causing more harm than good. Sometimes, protecting an innovation means controlling how it's released to the world." His arguments were compelling, but something about his tone suggested there was more to the story. "What exactly are you asking of me?" Marcus turned back to me, his expression serious. "Complete loyalty, total discretion. And in return, Technova will ensure your research receives the development it deserves, the protection it needs, and the global impact it's meant to have. And if I choose not to sign these agreements?" For a moment, Marcus's friendly demeanor slipped, revealing something harder underneath. "Alexa, you're a smart woman. You understand how this industry works. Patent laws, non-compete clauses, intellectual property rights. These things exist for a reason. Your research was conducted using Technova's resources, on Technova's time, with Technova's equipment. The implication was clear. If I didn't cooperate, Technova would ensure that my research never saw the light of day, and my career in the industry would be over. That afternoon, I found myself walking through the Technova campus, observing my colleagues as they worked. These were good people, brilliant minds dedicated to innovation, but they were also people who had learned to navigate the complex world of corporate science, accepting limitations and compromises I was just beginning to understand. The weight of the decision pressed down on me as I returned to my lab. The coding samples sat on my workbench, innocent-looking substances that had somehow become the center of a moral and professional crisis. As the Silicon Valley sun set outside my window, I realized that whatever choice I made would fundamentally change not just my career, but who I was as a person. The following Monday arrived with the crisp clarity that often follows a weekend of deep contemplation. I had spent Saturday hiking in the Santa Cruz Mountains, hoping the solitude would provide answers. Instead, I found myself more convinced than ever that the path Technova wanted me to take was wrong. At 9 a.m. sharp, Jennifer Walsh appeared at my lab door with Harrison in tow. Their expressions were serious but not unkind, the look of people who believed they were about to solve a problem. "Alexa," Jennifer began, settling into the chair across from my desk. "We've been thinking about your concerns, and we want to present you with an offer." Harrison pulled out a folder and placed it before me. "We understand that this transition hasn't been easy for you. Change never is, especially when it involves work you're passionate about." I opened the folder to find a contract modification and a check that made my breath catch. The amount was staggering, $65,000, with a note that it was a retention bonus for my continued loyalty and discretion. "This is in addition to your regular salary," Jennifer explained. "Consider it a recognition of the extraordinary value you've brought to Technova." I stared at the check, my mind racing. $65,000 was more money than I'd ever seen at once. It was enough to pay off my student loans, help my parents with their mortgage, and give me the financial security I'd been working toward my entire adult life. "There's more," Harrison added. "We're prepared to offer you a promotion to principal research scientist, a 30% salary increase, and your own research team. You'd be leading Technova's new environmental technology division." The offer was everything I thought I wanted professionally. Leadership, recognition, financial security, all contingent on my silence about the coding technology. "I need time to think," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer's smile was understanding but firm. "Of course. Take the day. But Alexa, I want you to understand something. This offer won't be available indefinitely. We have shareholders to consider, timelines to meet, and business decisions to make." After they left, I sat alone in my lab, staring at the check. The number seemed to pulse on the page. $65,000. Just to stay quiet. Just to let Technova control when and how my research would be released to the world. I called my parents that evening, something I'd been avoiding since the crisis began. My mother answered, her voice warm with the slight accent she'd never quite lost despite decades in America. "Mija, you sound troubled." I found myself explaining the situation in careful terms, avoiding the technical details but conveying the moral complexity I faced. My father, who had worked 2 jobs to put me through college, listened quietly before speaking. "Alexa," he said in his measured way, "your mother and I didn't come to this country so you could compromise your values for money. We came so you could stand up for what's right." His words hit me like a physical blow. Here were 2 people who had sacrificed everything for my education, telling me that money wasn't worth abandoning my principles. The next morning, I arrived at Technova with a heavy heart, but a clear mind. I had made my decision, but I needed to understand exactly what I was walking away from. I scheduled a meeting with Rebecca Martinez, ostensibly to discuss the legal implications of the contract modification. But what I really wanted was to understand Technova's true intentions for my research. "Rebecca," I asked as we sat in her sterile office, "what's the real timeline for releasing the coding technology?" Rebecca's expression was carefully neutral. "That depends on market conditions, competitive analysis, and strategic considerations. Can you be more specific?" She leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "Alexa, some technologies are so revolutionary that they need to be introduced gradually. Too much change too quickly can disrupt entire industries. Are we talking months? Years? We're talking about what's best for the company and the industry as a whole." Her non-answer told me everything I needed to know. Technova had no intention of releasing my research anytime soon. They would sit on it, perhaps indefinitely, using it as a strategic advantage while the world continued to struggle with electronic waste and environmental degradation. That afternoon, I found myself in the company library, researching intellectual property law and the rights of researchers. What I discovered was both alarming and liberating. While Technova had legitimate claims to my work, those claims weren't as absolute as they'd led me to believe. The research I'd conducted was based on preliminary work I'd done in graduate school. My notebooks from that period clearly documented the foundational concepts that had led to the breakthrough. More importantly, several key insights had come to me during my own time, away from Technova's facilities. As I pored over patent law and employment contracts, a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, potentially career-ending, but it was also the only way I could live with myself. That evening, I called Elena Vasquez again. This time, our conversation was different. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, mija. If I were to leave Technova and pursue this research independently, what would my options be?" There was a long pause before Elena responded. "It would be difficult. Very difficult. You'd need funding, laboratory space, legal representation, and you'd be taking on one of the most powerful companies in Silicon Valley. But is it possible, Alexa? Anything is possible if you're willing to pay the price. The question is, are you prepared for what that price might be?" As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of my small apartment, I realized that I was. The coding technology wasn't just my life's work. It was my responsibility to the world, and I was going to find a way to fulfill that responsibility, no matter what it cost. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes from making a difficult decision. I had spent the night drafting my resignation letter, carefully wording it to avoid any legal complications while making my position clear. The $65,000 check sat on my kitchen table, unsigned and unwanted, a symbol of everything I was choosing to walk away from. At 8 a.m., I walked into Marcus Thompson's office with my resignation letter and the check. The morning sun streamed through his floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the awards and accolades that lined his walls. His expression shifted from surprise to concern, to something that looked like cold anger. "Alexa, I think you're making a mistake," he said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "This is not how business works. You can't just walk away from contractual obligations." "I'm not walking away from anything," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm choosing not to sign agreements that I believe are ethically wrong." Marcus stood and walked to his window, his back to me. "Let me be very clear with you. If you leave Technova, you'll find it very difficult to work anywhere else in this industry. We have relationships with every major technology company. Your research will never see the light of day." "Then I'll find another way," I said, standing to leave. Some things are more important than career advancement. As I walked out of his office, I felt a mixture of terror and liberation. The elevator ride down 42 floors felt like a descent into an unknown future. The next few weeks were the most challenging of my life. True to Marcus's word, every job application I submitted was either ignored or rejected. The Silicon Valley network that had once seemed so welcoming now felt like a closed door, with invisible hands ensuring my professional exile. My savings dwindled quickly. The small apartment in Mountain View that had once felt like a symbol of my success now felt like a financial burden I couldn't afford. I ate ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I cared to count, and the stress began to take its toll. I lost weight, developed dark circles under my eyes, and found myself questioning whether I'd made the right choice. But I wasn't entirely alone. Elena Vasquez introduced me to Dr. Michael Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, a patent attorney who specialized in intellectual property disputes. Michael was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had built his career helping inventors protect their rights against corporate giants. His office in Palo Alto was modest but warm, filled with books, and the kind of organized chaos that spoke of a brilliant mind at work. "Alexa, Michael said as we sat across from each other. What you're describing is a classic David and Goliath situation. But you have something that many people in your position don't have. What's that? I asked, genuinely curious. Documentation. Your graduate school research, your personal notebooks, the timeline of your discoveries. These things matter in patent law. Teknova may have funded your final breakthrough, but they didn't create the foundational knowledge that made it possible. Michael's retainer fee consumed the last of my savings, but his confidence gave me hope. We spent countless hours going through my research, documenting the timeline of my discoveries, and building a case for my intellectual property rights. Meanwhile, I had moved back in with my parents to save money. Their small house in San Jose, where I'd grown up, felt both cramped and comforting. The walls were lined with family photos, my graduation from Stanford, my parents' naturalization ceremony, moments of triumph and struggle that had defined our family's American dream. My mother would bring me coffee as I worked at the kitchen table, transforming their dining room into a makeshift laboratory where I refined my research, using equipment borrowed from Elena's Stanford lab. The familiar smell of my mother's cooking mixed with the chemical odors of my experiments, creating a strange but comforting environment. "Mija," my mother said one evening as I worked late into the night. "You look tired. Are you sure you're doing the right thing?" "I have to believe I am, Mom," I replied, looking up from my notes. "This technology could help save the planet. I can't let it disappear into some corporate vault." My father, who had been quietly reading his newspaper, looked up and smiled. "Then we'll help you fight for it." The months that followed were a roller coaster of emotions. There were days when I felt confident and determined, working on patent applications and refining my research. But there were also days when I questioned everything, when the weight of my decision felt crushing. I watched my former colleagues at Teknova receive promotions and recognition, while I struggled to pay for basic necessities. The breakthrough came in October, 6 months after I'd left Teknova. I was contacted by Dr. Sarah Kim, the Chief Technology Officer of GreenTech Solutions, a mid-sized company that specialized in sustainable technology licensing. "Ms. Chen," Dr. Kim said during our first phone call, "we've been following your work through some mutual contacts. We're very interested in discussing a potential licensing agreement for your biodegradable coating technology." The meeting took place in GreenTech's headquarters in Oakland, a converted warehouse that buzzed with the energy of a company focused on environmental solutions. Unlike Teknova's gleaming towers, GreenTech's offices felt authentic, filled with prototypes and plants, whiteboards covered in equations, and the kind of creative chaos that comes from passionate innovation. Dr. Kim was a woman in her early 50s, with prematurely silver hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She had built GreenTech from the ground up, focusing on technologies that could make a real environmental impact. Her office was decorated with photos of renewable energy projects and environmental restoration sites, rather than corporate awards. "What you've developed could revolutionize how we think about electronic waste. But more than that, it could help address one of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time." We spent 3 hours discussing the technology, its applications, and the potential for global impact. Unlike my conversations at Teknova, this discussion focused on how quickly and broadly the technology could be deployed to benefit the environment. "The beauty of your coating," Dr. Kim explained, "is that it doesn't require manufacturers to completely redesign their products. It can be applied to existing production lines with minimal modification. That means we could see implementation within months, not years." What kind of licensing arrangement are you thinking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dr. Kim smiled. "We're prepared to offer you a $6.5 million licensing deal, with additional royalties based on implementation. The initial payment would be $2 million upon signing, with the remainder paid over 3 years as we bring the technology to market." I felt dizzy. The number was more than 100 times larger than the stay quiet money Teknova had offered. But more than the money, it was the commitment to global deployment that made my heart race. "There's something else," Dr. Kim continued. "We'd like to offer you a position as our Director of Environmental Innovation. You'd lead the team responsible for bringing this technology to market and developing related innovations. The salary would be $180,000 annually, plus equity in the company." The following weeks involved intense legal negotiations. Teknova, predictably, threatened to sue, claiming ownership of my research. Their lawyers sent cease and desist letters, filed injunctions, and made it clear they intended to fight aggressively. But Michael had prepared well. Our documentation clearly showed that the fundamental breakthroughs had originated from my independent work, both during graduate school and in my personal time. We had notebook entries, timestamps, and witness statements that established the timeline of my discoveries. The legal battle lasted 3 months and consumed another $50,000 in legal fees, money that GreenTech advanced against my future licensing payments. There were depositions, expert witnesses, and moments when I wondered if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. The turning point came when Elena Vasquez testified on my behalf. She had been my graduate advisor and could speak to the foundational research I'd conducted years before joining Teknova. Her testimony, combined with our documentation, proved that my breakthrough was built on work that predated my employment at Teknova. The coding technology, Elena testified, is the natural evolution of research that Alexa began in my laboratory. While she may have perfected it at Teknova, the fundamental innovation was her own. On a cold December morning, Michael called with the news we'd been waiting for. "Alexa, it's over. Teknova's claims have been dismissed. The patents are upheld and the licensing deal can move forward." I cried that day. Tears of relief, exhaustion, and vindication. The months of struggle, the financial hardship, the professional isolation, all of it had led to this moment. The signing ceremony took place at GreenTech's headquarters on a crisp January morning, exactly 1 year after I'd discovered the coding breakthrough. The facility was state-of-the-art, but more importantly, it was designed with a mission: to develop and deploy technologies that could help heal our planet. As I signed the licensing agreement, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The $6.5 million check felt surreal in my hands, but more meaningful was the knowledge that my technology would be implemented globally within 18 months. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Mija, we saw the news story about your licensing deal. We're proud of you, not because of the money, but because you chose to do what was right." The news coverage was extensive. TechCrunch called it the $6.5 million bet on environmental innovation. The Wall Street Journal featured it as a case study in intellectual property rights. But the coverage that meant the most to me was in environmental science and technology, which focused on the potential environmental impact of the coding technology. Within 6 months, major electronics manufacturers had begun incorporating my coding into their products. Samsung announced that all their smartphones would use the biodegradable coating by 2026. Apple followed suit, integrating it into their MacBook production line. Even smaller manufacturers embraced the technology, seeing it as a way to differentiate their products in an increasingly environmentally conscious market. As I stood in my new office at GreenTech, overlooking the San Francisco Bay, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The choice between $65,000 to stay quiet and $6.5 million to speak up had seemed impossible at the time. But it had really been a choice between compromising my values and staying true to my mission. The coding technology that had started as a laboratory experiment was now being implemented by manufacturers around the world. Electronics companies were incorporating it into their products, reducing electronic waste and environmental impact on a global scale. The technology I had almost allowed Teknova to bury was now helping to address one of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time. But more than the financial success or the environmental impact, I had learned something invaluable about the power of standing up for what you believe in. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards, and sometimes the right choice is also the profitable choice. My team at GreenTech had grown to 12 researchers, all working on technologies that could make a real difference in the world. We were developing new applications for the coding, exploring biodegradable alternatives to other electronic components, and partnering with universities to advance environmental technology research. The $65,000 check had represented everything I thought I wanted: financial security, career advancement, and the approval of powerful people. But walking away from it had led me to something far more valuable: the opportunity to use my talents in service of something greater than myself, and the knowledge that I had the courage to stand up for what I believed in, no matter the cost. On the first anniversary of my departure from Teknova, I received an unexpected email from Harrison Mitchell, my former supervisor. "Alexa," he wrote, "I wanted you to know that several of us have left Teknova to start our own company focused on environmental technology. Your courage inspired us to make our own stand. We'd love to discuss potential collaborations. As I read his message, I realized that my decision hadn't just changed my own life. It had rippled outward, inspiring others to choose integrity over security. The technology that Marcus Thompson had tried to suppress was now transforming an entire industry, and the example I'd set was encouraging other researchers to stand up for their principles. The sun was setting over the Bay Area as I finished reading Harrison's email, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I thought about the journey ahead, the new technologies we would develop, the environmental challenges we would address, and the lives we would impact. The $6.5 million licensing deal had changed my financial situation, but more importantly, it had validated my belief that doing the right thing doesn't always mean sacrificing success. Sometimes, it means finding a different path to achieve it.